who are your first 50 customers or 10 customers, whatever it is, who are your first 50 customers, and like, what do you know about them? Have you spoken to them? Are they ready to buy? And so I always focus on small, like if whether I'm looking at this as an investor or as a founder, if I know who those first 50 customers are, and the key is really, are they ready to trial a product that may not be perfect, like an MVP? Two, are they willing to buy? Are these not just, family members who are telling me nice things? And third, are they able to influence others within their circle? That becomes really key to developing, positive word of mouth when you first start.
I'm Brandon Reed, and you're listening to Ready, Set, Startup, a podcast that brings you industry-tested perspectives from leaders working in all areas of the startup lifecycle, so you can learn from the wisdom that they've gained over years in their fields of expertise and apply it in your own entrepreneurial journeys. Let's get into it. On today's show, I'm talking with Bob Knorr. It's hard to know where to even start with someone like Bob and all he's accomplished. It was so tricky to manage getting all his hard-earned wisdom packed into a single episode. He's a wealth of knowledge on everything from product development to funding to go-to-market strategy to creating a culture that respects and honors employees. He's had 3 very different experiences building companies from the ground up, and in our interview, we dig into aspects of each of them. We talk about how he walked away from a $15 million term sheet to bootstrap that same business and see it acquired by a publicly traded company. We discuss the importance of treating others with fairness, conducting yourself ethically, and making the right choices for your employees and your customers. The interview could have honestly been another hour long with all I wanted to ask him, but I think you'll find our conversation absolutely packed with valuable and practical insights you can take away and apply. Here's my interview with Bob. All right, guys, today we have Bob Knorr. Bob, thanks so much for joining me. How are you today?
Brandon, great. Great to see you, and looking forward to getting caught up.
Yeah, for sure. I know we do. We have a history like we were just talking about before. It feels like a lifetime ago, but I ran with your son in college. And so we knew each other from that. And it's been a long time, but it's been really fun to get reacquainted even with what you've been up to online as I've been doing some research and understanding all that you've accomplished. And there's just a breadth of experience, and I know it'll be extremely valuable for my listeners. So again, really appreciate you taking the time. We'll just dig right in and start going through these. Let's talk first about your path to entrepreneurship in general. And again, just like we spoke about, you can pull from whatever pieces feel applicable, but entrepreneurship, doing your own thing, is obviously unconventional. It is not the norm. So why did that feel right for you? Why was that the right path, and how did you come to it?
Well, I think it was really a journey. Like most things in life, it's, you don't wake up one day saying, I'm going to start a company. In my case, there were really several branches to my journey, beginning with a time in a large corporation where half of my time there was spent as an entrepreneur and starting new businesses with the backing of the large company I was working for. That then transitioned to a traditional bootstrap startup, and then later as an angel investor, advisor, and then even as a teacher, moved into teaching entrepreneurship, both at the high school, undergraduate, and graduate level for a time. So, but it really started when I was recruited to a management development program for a large multinational. The management development program was geared towards finance majors, but we went through a rotational program where we had an opportunity to learn all functions within the company. And that really prepared me for some of these entrepreneurial opportunities that I had.
I think that's often the case, right? Is that it takes a number of years and experiences, and is a bit of a journey to get to that. And I think you had a really interesting experience in that you had that entrepreneurial period where you were kind of fostering some of those skills, some of that mindset, but within a larger structure. I think that's really interesting because often that's not the case. Often people, you hear a lot, or I have, the guests I've had on, seem to just jump in feet first right out of school or while they're in school and don't have that kind of curing period at the beginning. So I bet that was a really interesting first chapter of your entrepreneurial journey?
Well, it sure was. It also provided me the confidence. So in addition to
Mm,
going out there and having the support and the training of a large company, and the support of senior management, it also provided me confidence so that when I eventually went out on my own, um, I had been through the rigors several times. At that point, using company money
yep.
and being hopefully a good steward for the company resources. But yeah, a lot of analogies to running, as you know,
Hmm.
it's like doing interval work, except in the entrepreneurial world. It's going out and
Yeah.
starting up, spinning up a couple companies on the company's dime, and then realizing, okay, it's race time. It's now time for me to step up and do this on my own, which is what I eventually did.
That's a really good analogy, actually. So let's do kind of talk about that as you go into your next step after that first chapter where you were kind of being an entrepreneur within this broad organization, and you went out on your own. Talk about that decision to found, and then walk me through the decision to found by yourself or to co-found. What decision you made and why as you got started.
Ultimately, the decision that was partially made for me. I was running a new startup in the medical technology world. We had done all the hard work. We got FDA approval, worked with the Department of Health and Human Services and the FDA and to get all the necessary clearances. And I was a small division or small business unit within a larger business. And the larger business was having trouble. And as a result, we were just in the process of launching. We were still cash negative. And so the corporation had to make some strategic decisions to defund my business.
Hmm.
So after being with the corporation for almost 20 years, they said, okay, you've got two opportunities. You've got, we're defunding your business unit. You can either stay with the company or you can move out on your own.
Hmm.
And so I ended up taking a package.
Oh, they gave you that option. That's interesting.
Yeah, they did. Actually, they gave me the opportunity to actually acquire and spin out the
Hmm.
company that I had founded. We went through that effort. We actually raised like $15 million in a very short period, like 3 weeks after
Well,
leaving, from two major VC firms in Silicon Valley. We ended up not taking that money and instead went back, retooled the business model. We found a way to do this on our own with a different technology, but all of the market know-how that I had developed within the corporation, I was able to take with me, if you will. My former company no longer interest in that space, wasn't big enough for a large
mhm.
Fortune 50 company, but for a small startup, the market opportunity was more than sufficient to satisfy myself and eventually my co-founders.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let's talk a little bit about that. You've said we, and you guys were doing, you said we did a lot of hard work, and there is a lot of hard work in there. There's FDA approval. I mean, even the process of going and getting funding and pitching your product. Who was the we? What was that founding team? And did you meet them at the company? And what was that partnership what did it look like at the beginning?
Yeah, so the key person with me was a woman who had served as my technical co-partner within the company. She had a great background, a Harvard med, MIT engineer, understood all the things that I didn't understand. I actually didn't know a whole lot, except I knew that she was the person that I needed to start this company with. So she had a great background also with other startups, so she knew the startup world. But I really became the individual who had, I was more market facing. I did a lot of the work with the regulatory agencies and had the business model, the financial models worked out. And so I would say I became the champion. I think every startup needs a champion. And that's not to diminish the role of co-founders.
Sure.
It just means like there's got to be that one person who at 2 o'clock in the morning is up thinking about the next problem. And so I was that person. I was that person also with the internal ventures I founded, but I was that person for our first venture, which is Tapestry Medical, which is we can talk a little bit more about that. But That was a medical device business that addressed the number one cause of hospital ER visits. This is about 20 years ago, and was the mission of that particular company. But in I would say to just step back and look at some general takeaways from identifying co-founders. I think it really begins with recognizing your own limitations as that champion. Understand your own limitations. I had zero clinical background, zero really. I think I barely scraped by biology 101. So I was not the person to be leading a medtech company by myself, but I understood those limitations, and I found several co-founders who were not only capable, but also who embraced the vision that as the champion or founder, I was able to put forward.
So that process, I actually do want to double click on that, because I think that's really maybe intimidating is the right word, but just feels like a real wall for people who know. I mean, you just hear all the time, any books you're reading, podcasts you're listening to, information you're intaking as you start a business. A lot of times you hear, find a co-founder, someone to be in the trenches with you. Not only does it make you more fundable, but like also it's just a wise move a lot of the time, not every time. Of course, there's caveats. But so when you hit that point in your business, how did you go find them? Like as I'm early in my process, I'm like, okay, do I like hit up forums? Like how do you frame that up for me? What was your next step when you knew you needed a co-founder? Where did you go and find them? I know you talked about your initial key employee. What about the others?
I think it really begins first by looking in the mirror and looking at where your own deficiencies are. So there's it starts with a dose of let's say humility and the willingness to say there's certain things I'm good at, certain things I'm not good at, and then go about and look at individuals who bring not just the talent, but also the trustworthiness. Those and individuals who get the vision, who embrace it, and who are as prepared as you are to be committed to that vision. Because as you know, starting businesses is really, really hard. And it's just when you think you know how hard it is, it gets harder. And again, that's, think of, to use a running analogy, it's like going on a 20-mile run. It's going to be hard, but it becomes real hard when you get into, miles 16, 17, and it's hot or cold or whatever.
Yeah, and absolutely. And to go with that running analogy, it is every time easier when there's people on your left and right. I mean, to be able to run with them, that push you, that encourage you, that you know their stepping rhythm, their breathing rhythm, you're there, you're anchored to them. I mean, that makes everything easier. And I think that's also true in business. You did talk about how early on you guys raised a lot of money, I'm sure, because there was so much already traction and market validation with what you guys were doing within that larger company. And you raised something you said, I think like 15 million very quickly, but decided not to take that money and go a different direction. When you decided not to take that money, how did you fund the early days of the business? Was that just cash flow from the customers you had early? How'd you fund the business early?
Well, it was a combination of self-funding and bootstrapping. It also, we were able to dial back our short-term plans until we had sufficient cash flow to fund the business. So that was the big part of it. And raising the money, again, we had a great story to tell. When the first time we actually had two competing term sheets. But when I got a term sheet that was, about $15 million, I also realized that our ownership stake, myself and the whole founders pool, was about 20 or 25%. So I realized I've just spent 20 years working for a large company where I was an employee. I wanted to go out and branch out on my own. And all of a sudden I realized I'm just an employee, another employee. I'm disposable. And I own some portion of 20% of the business. So I realized I was not going to really be able to control my destiny. And for a new venture like this, it really required independence. So that's what we did. We kind of scaled back expectations. We ended up, a big part of that, the money that we were looking for was to set up a manufacturing operation. So what we did was ended up identifying another company that had developed a similar technology for the professional space, our particular model was geared on towards testing patients at home, or enabling patients to test at home on their own. We were able to take a device that was used in a physician's office and modify that, and then enable individual patients to use that on their own. So that was the key. And so because we did that, yes, we had to pay a higher price because we were buying from another company, but we were able to avoid all of the capital investment required to set up a manufacturing line. We also spent the process. So we went from, probably an 18-month startup before we could produce the first product to about a 2-month process where we just had to negotiate a good supply agreement.
Yeah, and honing in all your costs so that you could bootstrap in that process. That's interesting. So let's transition a bit to and we can talk about any of these companies that you've started, and we can talk a little bit more about what those are. I want to know about this moment, though, that we're discussing in terms of your first company you started by yourself, or with your co-founders. This moment of go-to-market, like you have some traction, you have a product, you even maybe have some market validation. You figure out a way to fund it, whether that's getting funding or funding it yourself, and you are needing customers. You need to scale, you need to grow. How did you do that throughout your career and the various ventures you've started? What have you found in that go-to-market period is most critical? And walk us through that and how you found success in that.
Maybe by comparison, as also an angel investor, I've seen literally hundreds, if not thousands, of presentations over the years, also from teaching, my students. And invariably, when individuals pitch their companies, what I often hear is when they talk about the market opportunity, the total available market, you hear something that sounds something like, the market is, $100 billion. And if we only get X% of the total available market. Right. And then I always know it's which is very conservative. They always qualify that and say it's conservative. Mm-hmm. And my follow-up question is always, well, that's great. You're doing simple math, but like, who are your first 50 customers or 10 customers, whatever it is, who are your first 50 customers? And like, what do you know about them? Have you spoken to them? Are they ready to buy? If I were to call them right now, would you be? And so that's, I always focus on small, like if whether I'm looking at this as an investor or as a founder, if I know who those first 50 customers are, and, the key is really, are they ready to trial a product that may not be perfect, like an MVP? 2, are they willing to buy? Are these not just, family members who are telling me nice things?
Right.
And 3rd, are they able to influence others within their circle? That becomes really key to developing, positive word of mouth when you first start. I'll make reference to several companies. The first independent venture I started was Tapestry Medical, which is the remote patient monitoring business. That in that case, we actually had several customers. We had the patients that we were monitoring in their homes. We had doctors who had to prescribe that service to the patients. So patients couldn't just sign up on their own. They needed a doctor to buy. And so we needed both of them. We also needed the payers. In this case, it was Medicare and private insurers to pay for it. So we had to line all of those up.
Wow.
Or we could place, literally, create our first dollar in revenue. So that became critical. But that same exercise I went through is, which doctors are we going to focus on? What payers? Medicare was far and away the largest payer. So I had done a lot of work with Medicare and Congress and FDA and HHS to put all that in place before we started the company. So that part was done. But then going and finding the right doctors to start with became critical.
Yeah, that's it. I love that point but who are your first 50 customers, or your first 10? Are they ready to buy now? And I think it's a really critical differentiation for entrepreneurs early on in their process and product market fit process to say, are these people that are ready to spend their money? I know that seems really simple and obvious, but are these just people saying, because it's a very far jump from people saying, that's a great idea, I'd totally use that, to then you go, oh, awesome, here's the link. Do you want to buy? And people are like, oh, no, 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 like maybe later. And so to get that
Right.
validation from people actually willing to buy is important.
And I was going to say, and nowadays, with the this Venmo or Square, you can actually, call people's bluff, if you will. Okay, all right, Venmo me X number, and the product is yours. It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
oh, okay,
I'm glad you like it. Here's my Venmo. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So let's talk specifically in this med tech space. I know, and we haven't kind of gotten to your the timeless tartans piece, and we'll do that. But in med tech, to me as an outsider, industry outsider, I look at that and I would feel very intimidated by incumbents. I would be like, wow, there's some big players in med tech. How did you differentiate yourself early on from those bigger people that were already there for years, maybe even, I don't know, at that point, 100 years, like building their companies in tech, in medical and then med tech? How'd you differentiate yourself and then compete?
So two ways. First, when I was with my former company, we were a Fortune 50 company. So
Yeah.
I developed a lot of industry knowledge and a lot of industry contact and the support of a DC office that, that was adept at working with Congress, HHS, et cetera. So
Okay.
I had a lot of good coverage there
Yeah.
as we were setting up the business models. At the company I was working for was actually bigger than any of the 4 or 5 other larger, public companies that we ended up competing against. So
Mm.
I was, on the one hand, I was kind of a rookie when I moved down to that company into the individual startup world. But I was, within this little space, it was, I was a known entity with both the government agencies and within amongst the other competitors. So the other competitors knew me, and I had worked with them on some of the general policy work that we were doing on behalf of this nascent industry. So we were
Mm.
also, while we were competing against some of the largest med tech companies in the world, we were operating in a brand new space. So
Yeah.
no one
Yeah.
really had an advantage. And if anything, I would say I had an advantage because I
Hmm.
wasn't encumbered by,
Totally.
corporate bureaucracy. I was making my own decisions, but had the benefit of all the training. So
Mm.
I was probably not a typical first-time entrepreneur at that point.
That's a magic spot to be in, where you have the industry knowledge, the industry context, industry contacts, but in a brand new space that you can innovate and move quickly in, that other people have to catch up. That's really cool. So let's talk about some things. You can kind of choose any of your experiences of early on when you are building, getting ready to scale. We're kind of at this point where you have funded one way or another. You have some product market fit and some traction. And early on, there's some big bets that need to be taken, some risks that need to be taken to be taken on by the business. Walk me through some of those moments in any of your companies where you had to take a big risk, jump out on a limb and say, I don't know if this is going to work or not. And if it doesn't, there are major consequences. And what did you learn from that?
Couple that come to mind, that I'm going to go back to the Tapestry medical experience. One was, again, we were very thinly capitalized. So my wife and I personally provided all the funding. And early on, the key to getting what eventually became a national remote patient monitoring service was to develop credibility with large institutions. So the challenge is, are the patients that needed to learn how to use the devices. They had to do a blood test on themselves, similar to a diabetes glucometer, except this was measuring patients' coagulation time. But same principle. They had to be taught. Now, the way the business model that we had developed with Medicare worked was, it was our responsibility as the company providing the device and the monitoring service to handle the training. It wasn't the doctor's office or nurses. We actually had to handle that training ourselves. So we got a call early on from the Mayo Clinic, world renowned Mayo Clinic, that had patients located in really remote areas that would benefit from our service. And we would get paid from Medicare about $200 to conduct these training sessions. Now, at the time we were located in Silicon Valley, and the idea of getting someone to drive 4 or 5 hours into northern Minnesota to conduct a patient training, it just didn't happen. So there were times where I had to do that. Like myself, jumped in a plane from California to Minnesota, drove the 4 hours or so up into Moose Country and conduct trainings myself with the patients in their homes. It cost us at least $1,000 to do a training for which we got paid $200 for. So again, the dollars may be small. We did that enough where we were losing money on training, but we were developing a reputation with institutions like Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, and other clinics like that we were a reliable supplier. And so that was really key. And again, with thinly funded company, losing $1,000 or so every time we went out to train a patient, not to mention the time away from the office, was a risk. But getting Mayo Clinic as a reference site for us had huge consequences, and eventually established our reputation within the field.
Yeah, that is risky. And you knew intuitive. I mean, how did you know that risk was going to pay off in terms of, hey, this relationship with these big players will be worth it if we can pull that off?
I really didn't, and that's the problem with anything. When you're breaking new ground, you just don't know whether it's going to pay off. That's really, I mean, that gets to the very definition of what an entrepreneur is. You're getting into something without knowing the outcome. There's an element of faith. There's an element of confidence, and there's also a gut sense, developing a sense that, if it costs me, a few $1,000s to see a couple of patients like this, and I can leverage that with the Mayo Clinic, and also obviously, provide care for these patients who were at high risk, it was worth it. So,
by the way, it is remarkable. We talked about that you had even competing term sheets, opportunity to raise millions in funding. And then you saw, which I think I've heard a lot of horror stories of people that don't understand or see, or it's hidden from them, that fine print that says, hey, by the way, you'll lose most of your company. And if you do exit, it's going to be not worth the time you spent over the last 5 years building this business.
Right.
So but it's remarkable that you were able to turn down a dollar amount like that and then bootstrap. And then you and your wife supported it in the very beginning. I mean, that's really hard to do, period. It's really hard to do when you're offered money and there's a dollar amount staring you in the face, but obviously was the right choice. So that's remarkable. I don't think a lot of people don't catch that. So let's talk about as you've grown, any of your companies again that you as you scaled. Were there any moments within that scaling that you ever had to raise funding for again, like in any Series B or as you were building and growing and scaling?
Yeah, never professional money. The one thing we did do, this was also with Tapestry, which was it was a very capital intensive model, and it basically it involved us purchasing about $1,000 worth of medical equipment before we received our first dollar from Medicare. And then what we needed to do is, we would buy the equipment, roughly $1,000. We'd go and train the patient, and we'd get paid a couple $100 for that. And then if we continued to effectively monitor the patient, we would get about $200 per month in terms of a monthly revenue stream. Now, here's the risk. So this was, by the way, one of the things that we did when I was still with my former company was worked with Medicare to develop the very first pay for performance healthcare model. And that was really a breakthrough. So when I say we were a pioneer, that was what we pioneered. We pioneered the business model. And so what that meant was, if you just imagine what the economics of that looks like, yes, you're stepping into a $1,000 hole when you get a new prescription for a patient. But within, 5-6 months, you're break even. And if that patient is with you for 5 years, there's a great ongoing revenue stream. Okay. So 2 risks though. One, if
Yeah.
the patient stopped testing and returned the device or just didn't return the device, we were out $1,000.
Hmm.
And that, by the way, that happened a certain percentage of the time. And you just have
Sure.
to take your lumps and be better at training and select patients. But it was a great model. But if you stack now and look at adding, 500 new patients per month onto that system, we were spending $500,000 in equipment every single month. So it's literally stepping into a $500,000 hole and then just managing, the cash flow from those new patients we were adding in addition to our installed base and making sure that we weren't growing too fast. So our challenge after we got rolling was not adding new patients. It was more financial engineering to make sure
Yeah.
that the dollars worked. I will tell you a funny story. And there are 2 funding elements of that: SBA loan, but also a credit card. So at the time, Costco still does this, but they had a back program where anytime you use your Costco credit card, not just for Costco purchases, but for anything, you would get 2% back.
Hmm.
So what we did was, this was before 2008. That's a very important date
Yeah. Yeah.
because prior to that, we had good credit. It was a company credit card, but I was personally responsible for it. We were getting, we were buying $500,000 worth of product per month on that Amex credit card. Amex had given us a $500,000 credit limit, which is insane, but that's the world we were living in prior to 2008. And so we would, at the end of every year, we would get, at Costco, 2% cash. Well, when you're going through like $10 million of purchases on a Costco credit card, our bonus checks were like, $150,000.
Right.
So that's what we were living on. Actually,
Nice.
that was part of how we put our kids through college. We were living
Awesome.
and, but then overnight, all of that changed, September of 2008, financial crisis, and a bunch of other things happened. Our credit line. And so we were funding the business literally on a Costco credit card.
Wow.
Overnight, Amex reduced the credit line from $500,000, $15,000. And then we had some other, so all of a sudden our source of capital was gone. Just prior to that, and this is the second part of the funding, we had sought some SBA loans from our local community bank, and that was great. We had a great relationship with our bankers, but those were, an SBA loan is, in this instance, it's not backed by the SBA. And SBA provides secondary backing, but ultimately we had to mortgage our houses. There was a lien on our house for a very, very large SBA loan to fund the growth of the business. So, anyway, so it was a very creative way of finding business. My wife, who was a design major, by the way, in school, was our financial engineer. I can't take credit for any of this. She was the one who engineered this Costco approach, and it worked very, very well.
Wow. Amazing. Costco. That's the first for me that I've heard. That's amazing. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about this moment of scaling. You're building your companies, any of them, you can pull from any of those experiences. As you build and grow as a CEO, as a founder, you need to be casting a vision, articulating that to the organization, and you need to be fostering a culture that executes on that vision as you grow, as you get bigger, more and more people get added. Talk me through how you do that, how you found success doing that over the years.
I've mentioned, I think several times, the importance of, both a champion and creating a vision that people can rally around. The challenge with the vision is you're always looking 3 to 5 years down the road as a founder CEO and to drive today's actions and tomorrow's actions, et cetera. The key, what I found is the key to getting individuals to continue to follow you is to always keep that vision in sight, and balance flexibility. So as circumstances change, be prepared to refine that vision and explain why the vision may be tweaked or refined. Uh, and on the other hand, not being too rigid with regard to that vision. But the balance is changing a vision every month sounds like you're chasing shiny objects or pursuing the flavor of the month. Being too rigid is it suggests that you're not really in tune to what's success or failure. So I think having being able to communicate why that vision is changing, holding fast to it, but holding it in a flexible way so that you can modify as needed.
I think that's really good. And a lot of times the piece that's ignored is that you're told to cast a vision, and then there's this like iron will that has maybe caused you to succeed in so many things as a founder, but that's not necessarily always the case. As you need to what I think you said, a term like listen to what the market's telling you, and to be hearing that and adapting. Let's pivot into a couple different pieces here for the sake of time. I'll skip through a couple of them, but I want to talk through some more practical pieces of advice that founders listening might be able to take away from you, your journey, your accomplishments. And one of those would be hiring. We just touched on it as we bring more people to an organization and cast that vision. But what advice would you have for founders who are right at the cusp of that, who are just growing? Maybe they have some traction and they need to bring more people on board, and maybe they're hesitant to do that. What's some advice or some thoughts you'd have for them in that moment?
If you look at your employee base as a series of concentric circles, beginning with your inner circle, your co-founders, those individuals who, personally, their commitment, their trustworthiness, et cetera, that becomes important. Those individuals generally are generalists. It's really hard to get someone is super focused on a particular area. So you're really relying on generalists. And as the organization scales, the challenge, and there's always a point, and it's a little bit different depending upon what functional area of the company you're looking at, whether it's operations or marketing, et cetera, where it's less about a single individual or small team having generalist skills, and now you need to get into really, really deep functional technical skills. That transition is really, really difficult to manage. And by the way, some generalists don't make that transition. It's hard to take someone who's, running, half of the company and then tell that person, hey, we need you to focus on this one vertical because we're bringing in someone else who's more adept at, marketing or whatever. And so that's, doing that is a real challenge. I would say one of the things, just a very practical thing to do is early on, make sure you know every single person you bring on board. I'm not talking about just co-founders, but also the next level and other team members. One of the things I did was always made sure that I met every single new employee during the hiring process. When we were a smaller company, just a few dozen people, we would have barbecues or pizza at my house every weekend or every Friday night. We'd finish off the week, and it was a way to get people to know them and their families, know their names. As you start growing, we eventually finished with at Tapestry with several hundred employees, and then another 2,000 contract employees.
Wow.
So I couldn't know the names of all 2,000 contract employees, but I knew the names of most of the couple hundred full-time employees we had in our California offices, and making sure that you understand, particularly as you move outside the co-founder circle and even the senior management circle, understanding the motivations of your day-to-day employees. And beyond so one of the things we were able to do, again, in a healthcare field, was we focused not on sales, because, the average person working 40 hours a week, they couldn't relate or couldn't personally relate to sales, or what we did was focused on clinical outcomes. So if we took someone who might have been making a little bit above minimum wage, very important role, but they were responsible for filing or whatever. And they understood that the service that we were providing our patients was preventing strokes, preventing ER visits. They could relate to that
Yeah.
because many of the individuals had family members who benefited from our services. And it gave them it was actually another form of like emotional compensation
Yeah.
that they have, and they go home and they tell their family and friends, what I'm doing is helping to save lives. So, getting individuals to really buy into that on a very personal level was critical to keeping that culture going.
That's a great answer, Bob. I really resonate with that. And I think that I love that term of emotional compensation. I think it's a very real thing. And, that's one thing that Disney, as I was working for them, did exceptionally well. Everybody at Disney that works at Disney is called a cast member because you're all part of the show, right? And everybody takes part, and you do this piece, the orientation's called traditions, and they walk you all the way through why exactly what you do, whether that's filling an ice cream cone, sweeping the street, or filing away the company's taxes, like that matters to the vision of, it's 3 words. It's we create happiness, and everybody can relate to that. Everybody can tie back to that and go back to their family and say, I'm proud of where I work because I'm helping to create happiness. And that's emotional compensation. Right. Yeah. I really like that term. What is one hard and fast truth, a gospel truth that you consistently find yourself going back to when you have been running your businesses, like a principle that you seem to live by that proves itself out to work time and time again?
I think for me, the gospel truth is really the gospel. It's do unto others. One of the things I learned from my father was an idea of fairness. And he started doing something when I was about 4 years old that really, I still haven't lost this lesson. Whenever we would go out, he would take me running on errands on like a Saturday morning when he was off. And inevitably he'd stop and get some tasty cakes or whatever, or soft pretzels. We lived in Philadelphia, so that was kind of a big thing. And he would always buy one. And what he said was, we're going to split this, but the way we're going to split this is you cut, I choose. So, as a 4-year-old, a greedy little 4-year-old, you look at this and say, okay, how can I cut this? So 90% for me, 10% for my dad, right? That's, sinful little 4-year-old.
That's great.
And so that's what I would do. Of course, he would say, okay, you cut 90% and 10%, and now I get to choose. And then, I would realize, well, that didn't work well. And, but that notion of, fairness as exemplified by you cut, I choose has, continues to play out. And the way you can express that in a more mature way is always be prepared to live with what you negotiate with others. So when, I've done a lot of business development over the years. I spend probably more time thinking about the individual or the organization that I'm negotiating with to understand what's really, really important to them, developing a deal that they can be happy with. And because I know if they can be happy with it and I can be happy with the other side of that deal, then, first of all, it's fair. It's fair because they've accepted it. And, I found negotiations much, much easier when I take that approach.
That's wonderful. And I think that I've seen that even in my short career. I've seen that fairness, morality, the gospel, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, is not only right, but it's good business. That it makes sense because it works. And when you treat people fairly, they do business with you again. And it's just wise practice, not just from a morality standpoint, but from a business standpoint. Before we head into some closing questions, I do want to talk about you exiting your companies. You've had a couple exits, and that's a really, intricate and complex, nuanced process. Walk me through, even just at a summary level, what were some of the takeaways you had from that navigating an exit from your company, a sale of your company, whether it was a sale or acquisition, kind of talk through that and what you learned in that process.
It really began with creating advantage with us. So at the time, I'm going to use Tapestry Medical because that was at that point we had reached a point where we were, although we were still a privately funded company, we were competing against 4 or 5 other large publicly traded companies. We had done some work on regulations, and it involved training. You've heard me make reference training several times. We had developed a network of about 1,000 nurse educators. They were contract nurses. We went through an accreditation process with the university, developed that program. And at the same time, our competitors were not doing that in-person training. What they were doing was, sending 80-year-olds videotapes or CDs and telling the people to train themselves. That was certainly more efficient. It didn't cost them, hundreds of dollars to send a nurse educator out to spend 2 hours with a patient. So it was, their approach was economically more efficient in the short term, but less beneficial to the patient and ultimately their business model. So that became a key point of differentiation. Once we built up that network, I ended up going to the FDA and made recommendations to change training method to require that only patients who had been trained face-to-face were eligible for this benefit. FDA agreed with the data that we presented, that this was not just good business sense, but it was, more importantly, it was good clinical sense for patient safety. And so they agreed. And so what happened was my competitors were not too pleased with me. And within a few days of the new regulations coming out, I got calls from all of our competitors, not too happy that I did this on my own, but they knew it was the right thing to do. And immediately they said, well, would you be willing to subcontract out your nurse network? And I refused to do that. That would have been a source of income at a time when we could have used the income. I said, you can actually own the network, but you've got to own the company first. So what then happened was I understood what their needs are.
Yep, exactly.
And going back to the previous question, and what happened was, an auction for the company. And we were very fortunate to become part of another large company that also had a competitive division that was also having some operational problems that we were able to come in and solve. But I think the key to really generating, a good premium on the value of our company was to understand what their pain points were, to understand what they needed, both not just in terms of the training network, but also some of their operational inefficiencies that they were having at the time, and to be able to come in and help solve those problems.
I really love that. And I think that's another great, just like you said, a great point of understanding their needs, what they're actually asking for, and capitalizing on that. That's really great. So let's move into just a couple closing questions here, Bob. You've done a lot of work with, I know through an alumni network, we didn't touch on that much, but you've done so much. There's only so much I can fit into this episode. But you've done a lot of work with your alma mater and other just aspiring entrepreneurs. And I know, like you said, you've received hundreds or thousands of pitches and worked with a lot of different individuals. As you speak with those entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, what's a question that you just find you get asked really often? And what's a question that they're not asking, but they should be?
Probably two sides of the same coin. The question I always get asked is something around getting funding, VC funding often. And I often hear, sometimes from some of my old students, they're very pleased when they get their first angel investor. And I understand the importance of that, but it is important because many students coming right out of school are not in a position to self-fund the business. But so a lot of questions around how to fund the business, terms, really detailed questions around that. I think the question that's not asked, that should be asked, is how do I either avoid taking outside money or minimize the funding that I receive, or delaying when I get that funding. The longer you can survive on your own, the more you have an opportunity to retire risk which then translates into a higher valuation and then better terms for you as a founder. So I think it's, going out and getting a quick $1 million investment in the business. And Brad, I think you touched on this early on. It's not just about the money. Is it smart money? Is it money that also brings real good industry expertise along with it? Or is it just someone's check who's has no vested interest in the business aside from the financial investment itself? So really, can you avoid it? Can you avoid the investment or delay it or minimize it? I think it's in those areas.
Yeah, that's great. Poignant wisdom from someone who's been on both sides of that coin. I think that's really good perspective.
Yeah.
So imagine, Bob, that you woke up at the start of your career. You somehow maintained all of your knowledge and experience that you have gained over your years of expertise and experience, but you are starting at the beginning. How do you spend that first week of that fresh start?
I would spend every minute with prospective customers. I'd listen to them. I'd understand. I would not make any assumptions at all about what they want or what their needs are. I would really live life with them to understand what their pain points are, or their desires are, so that we can make sure that we build products and business models that meet those needs.
That's great. I can tell you how many entrepreneurs I've talked to that in their past they have these horror stories of building a whole product, spending time and money, and building something that, like we talked about earlier, nobody is willing to pay for, nobody wanted in the first place. So spending the time to ask those questions up front is important. Lastly, what's one tool or quote or book, just some piece of content that you have found indispensable to either you personally or professionally over the years?
I think there are two. We talked a lot about the importance of getting outside input, whether it's from the customers, co-founders, or other individuals who have experience. I think the book of Proverbs addresses many of the things we've discussed today, including scaling, funding, fairness, hiring. Every morning, I start every morning by reading the proverb of the day, the book of Proverbs of the day. So today is the 26th. Read Proverbs 26. One in particular, Proverbs 15:22 that I read last week was, without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. And I think that goes a long way in addressing who your co-founders are, who your employees are, who your investors are. And so I would really encourage anyone to really use Proverbs as a book of wisdom for life and general business in particular.
That's really great, Bob. I really appreciate this perspective, all of your insights. You've had such a breadth of experience, and you just bring such wisdom to the conversation. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share that with me, with my audience. I've learned a lot. I have 2 pages of full notes here, so I really appreciate you taking the time.
Brandon, it's been great to get caught up. It's always great to talk to a fellow runner, because
Absolutely.
I think a lot of the entrepreneurial journey is similar to pounding the pavement and the perseverance and the tenacity required to be an elite runner, as you were, maybe still are. And so, congratulations on this new initiative, and really look forward to staying in touch. And please give my regards to Katie as well.
I definitely will. Thanks so much, Bob. You take care.
All right. Okay. God bless.
If you guys enjoyed the show, leaving a review is the best way to help others find it, second only to sharing it directly with your friends and family. Thanks so much for helping get the word out. Hit me up at brandon@readysetstartuppod.com. If you have additional questions about a topic I covered, have suggestions about another area you'd like to see me dig into, or just want to say hi, please reach out. I'd love to get in touch. Keep imagining, keep creating, keep inspiring your spheres of influence with what you're passionate about. The world may just need that dream that's in your head. See you next time.